Hey, what's up guys, how's it going? Welcome to the Next-Auth complete guide. In today's video, you're going to learn how to add user authentication system with providers like GitHub, Twitter, and Google in your Nextjs project. In the previous video series, we have learned how to create a Jamstack blogging website with Nextjs. You can check that out if you want. I'll put the link on the description. So in that application, we have added many features like embedded components, then view counter, auto completion search, and so many other things. But we didn't add any user authentication system. So in today's video, we're gonna add just that. We're going to add user authentication system with Next-Auth. It is a library which will allows you to create authentication system for your Nextjs project. So in this video, we're going to build this. We're not going to make any useful application. My goal is to teach you how to add authentication system with Next-Auth. After watching this video, you can implement the authentication system on your application. So basically, this is our sign-in page. We have these three buttons for signing in with GitHub, Twitter, and Google. So let me give you a demo. I will log in with Google. So I will click on this button. And now it is asking me for choosing an account. So I'm going to choose this one. And it is saying checking authentication. You are already signed in. And I'm redirected to the home page, and it says sign in as my email address, and it also has a sign out button. So let's click on it. And again, now I'm in the sign in page. So you can see that Google authentication works. We will also add email authentication system. Then we're going to learn how to set up a database where you can store user data. I'm going to use MongoDB as our database, but you can choose whatever you want. And all of this authentication logic will be written in a single file because Nextjs simplifies everything for us. So if you are interested about today's video, please consider like this video and subscribe to my channel to see more of these React.js videos. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me give you a quick introduction of mine. My name is Sanjan. I'm a full stack web developer who can develop complex web applications from UI to backend systems. You can watch my work by visiting my portfolio website thatonjon.me, then just go to projects, and here you'll see all of the projects that I have worked on. I'm looking for a new opportunity in a company where I can provide great value with my skills and knowledge. So if you are a recruiter or someone who wants a new team member who can solve problems, can develop real-world application, feel free to contact me. You can reach out to me by email, LinkedIn, or Twitter. All of the links are going to be in the description just for you. Alright, enough of my introduction. Let's get straight into the tutorial. Alright guys, so first of all, we need to create a Next.js app. You can create this with these commands. So I'm gonna grab this command from here and I'll paste it. And I want to use npm instead of yarn. So I'm gonna use a flag called --use -npm that will use npm instead of yarn, and my app name will be next-auth -yt. So now let's create the app. And our Next.js app is created, so let's cd into the folder. And before I install any kind of packages, I want to do some cleanup on the app. I don't want the styles directory, so I'm gonna remove that. Now git, because it is a git repository, and I like to create a source directory where I put all of my source code. I would like to move the pages directory inside the source directory. And now the pages directory is inside the source directory. Now we can install our necessary packages. So I'm just gonna grab the command from my blog and I will paste it here. So let's install them. Alright, so the packages are now installed. So I will open up the app on my editor So let's first go to the source directory, then pages, and open up the underscore app.js file. I don't need this import, and I need to destructure the page props. I want the session, and I want the rest of the page props. And I need to import some component from Next.Auth and Chakra UI. I need to import the session provider from Next.Auth React. It will be a named import. Session provider. From Next.Auth/React. And I want the Chakra provider from @Chakra UI React. And now I need to wrap this component with these providers. So I'm gonna add the session provider first. And inside the session provider, we will add Chakra provider. And I will add the component in the middle. The session provider will take a prop session, and it will be the session from the props. I guess that's it for this file. Let's open up the index.js file, and I will remove all of this code. Let's create a new component. I will call it home. Let's see if Chakra UI works or not. I will import a heading component from Chakra UI React, and I will add a heading here. Text will be subscribe to Q's coding. So let's see if it works or not. So on another terminal, I'm gonna run the server with npm run dev. And let's go to localhost 3000. And you can see we have a heading text, subscribe to Q's coding, and it is also styled, so Chakra UI is working. And I'm just going to move this tab on my editor workspace, and now it is looking good. So now let's set up Next.Auth. To set up Next.Auth, we need to use the API directory in the pages directory. So inside the API directory, we need to create another directory called auth. And inside the auth, we need to create a file. And the file name has to be wrapped by the square brackets. And the name is 3 dots, then Next.Auth, then .js. The file name has to be same. So let's open it up. So first of all, let's import Next.Auth from Next.Auth. This Next.Auth is a constructor, so we need to export an instance of this. So export default, and let's call the Next.Auth, and it will take a parameter which will be an object. Inside the object, we will have a providers property which will be an array, and inside the array you can pass all of your providers like GitHub provider, Google provider, and so on. Now before we set up any kind of provider, let's learn how to check if a session already exists or not. So let's go to index.js. Here we need to import a hook which is use session. So import, it will be a named import, use session from Next.Auth React, and let's call the use session hook, and this will return you an object. So I'm gonna destructure it. It will have a data property which will be the session actually, but I'm gonna rename it to session. So if the session exists, we're gonna render some text else we're gonna render a different text. So if session exists, we're gonna render a heading text, and the text will be you are signed in. Else we're gonna render a different text. I'll copy this line, and it will be you are not signed in. I will delete this one, and you can see it's telling me that you are not signed in because the session is null. So let's add a button here to sign in. So button from Chakra UI, and we need a function called sign in. It will from Next.auth React. So let's add the button. And the text will be sign in. And let's add an on-click handler. Oops, it has to be inside a fragment. And we need to add an on-click handler. And we're just gonna pass the sign in. And let's click on sign in. And you can see it is telling me error because we haven't set up any kind of provider. So now let's do that. So now let's set up a provider. We're gonna set up the GitHub provider at first. Then we're gonna customize our UI a little bit. Then we're gonna set up other providers like Twitter, Google, then email, and also we're going to add a database. So let's set up the GitHub provider. First of all, you just have to go to this URL, github.com/settings/applications/new. And here you need to create a new OAuth application. Just give your application name. I will call it Next.auth YT. And give your homepage URL. I will give my website. And then give your authorization callback URL. And this callback URL will be same for all the providers, which is HTTP. Depending on the environment, if you are on production, then it might be HTTPS, but on development, HTTP localhost 3000/API/auth/GitHub. The last part is the provider name. If you are using Twitter, then it will be /callback/Twitter. And now register application. And it will give you a client ID and a client secrets, and we need to store them in an environment variable. So generate a new client secret. So this is our client ID and this is our client secret ID. And don't worry, I will remove the app after recording this video. We need to store these IDs in environment variables, which is pretty easy to do in Nextjs. Just create a new file on the root of your project. And the file name is .env.local. It will be a dot file, so that's why it will be hidden. So let's create a variable, GitHub ID and GitHub secret. So I'm just gonna copy this ID. Also the secret one. Now the common convention for environment variables is to use capital letters, and instead of space use the underscores. That's it for the GitHub environment variables. Let's go to the Next.auth file and let's import the GitHub provider. From Next.auth/providers/GitHub. And let's add the GitHub provider inside the array. So GitHub provider, and we need to pass an object. We need to pass the client ID, and the ID will come from the environment variable. So process.env. I'll just copy the variable name, and also client secret. I'll copy this. And the variable name will be GitHub secret. Okay, so that's it for the GitHub provider. Let's go to our app and go to the home page. And now let's click sign in. And you can see it has taken us to another route, localhost /API/auth/sign in. And we haven't created this page. This page was created by the Next-Auth. So let's click on sign in with GitHub. Try signing in with a GitHub account. And we have an error. Client ID is required. We have provided the client ID. Oh, I guess I have to restart the server. Sorry for that. So again, npm run dev. And now it should work fine. So we just need to refresh this page. So now let's click on sign in with GitHub. We should not have any error. And it has taken us to this page. So let's click on the authorize button. And you are being redirected to the authorized application. And you can see we are on the home page, but this time it is saying you are signed in, because this time the session is available. That's why it is saying you are signed in. So let's see what is inside the session. So I'm gonna console log it. And let's open up the dev tool. And ignore this warning. We have an object printed out. And inside the object we have an expires property, which is a date, and we have a user object which is containing all of the user, so we can display them. And instead of just this text you are signed in, we will just use signed in as we will print out the user email. So session.user.email. And you can see it is telling us signed in as datonjon@gmail.com. Okay. So now that we have the functionality of sign in with GitHub, now let's see how we can sign out. It is pretty easy to do. I'll just copy this button and I'll paste it here. And instead of sign in, it will be sign out. And again, I need a wrapper, so I will use fragment. And we need to import the sign out function from Next-Auth. And we need to trigger the sign out function on click. So now let's click on this button. And you can see we are no longer signed in. We have a sign in button. So we have successfully signed out from our GitHub account. And you might have noticed that there was a page refresh. And that's not a good user experience. But we can prevent that. And that is pretty easy to do. So I'm going to create a function. Const handle sign out. And we are going to call the sign out function. Now when calling the sign out function, we can pass an options object, and inside the options object you have to pass a redirect property, which will take a boolean value. We're gonna pass false. By default it is true. That's why we have the page refresh. And instead of sign out, we're gonna pass handle sign out. So let's see. So I'm gonna sign in again. Sign in with GitHub. And you can see we are now signed in. Now if I click on sign out, we shouldn't have page refresh, and you can see we didn't have page refresh. And you can see that even after page refresh, we are still on the previous page. But if you want to redirect the user to a different page while signing out, you can pass another options called callback URL. So I'm going to pass that. I'm going to pass a URL /sum, which doesn't exist. So let's sign in again. Sign in with GitHub. And now let's click sign out. You can see that we are no longer signed in, but it didn't take me to this route. The reason is redirect false. So if you want to redirect your user to another route, you need to have page refresh, but we can prevent that still. So let's see, we're gonna make this function async. And I'm gonna import the user router hook from next router. And let's add curly braces. Now this sign out function is an async function, so we need to await this. So await, and it will return you a data object. So const data, and this data has a URL property which will be equals to this callback URL. So after sign out, we can redirect the user to this URL using the use router's push method. So let's get the push method. Const push, and it's from use router. And let's push the user to data.url. So I'm going to create another file in the pages directory. I will call it sum.js, and let's just create a component. So now let's sign in again. Let's sign in with GitHub, and now let's click sign out. And you can see we are redirected directly to the /sum route. So that's how you handle sign out functionality. And before I implement other providers like Google, Twitter, and email, I want to style these pages a bit, and also I want to create a custom sign-in page. So let's go to _app.js file. I'm going to import the grid component from Chakra UI. And I will wrap the component by the grid component. And I will add some style with sxprop. I want the height to be 100 view height, and place items to center, and padding on the horizontal side will be 5 rem. Oops, it will be a string. Then text align will be center. I guess that's it. Now let's go to the index.js file, and again I will import the grid component, and I will replace these divs with grid. I will make place items to center, grid row gap will be 1 rem. Oops, there shouldn't be comma. Alright, so our page is looking pretty good. Now let's create the sign-in page. So the custom sign-in page route will be /auth/sign-in. So I need to create another directory in the pages directory. It will be auth. And I'll create a file, signin.jsx. So let's create a component. And you can tell Next.Auth to redirect the user to /auth/sign-in page when the sign-in function will be called. So just go to the Next.Auth file. And inside the Next.Auth, pass a property called pages, which is an object, and here you can specify all of your custom pages. So for sign in, it will be /auth/sign-in. So let's see if it works or not. Now I will click on sign in. Um, 404 page could not be found. Oops, the I should not be capital letter, it should be lowercase I. So let's go to the home page again. So let's click on sign in. And now we're on /auth/sign-in route. Another thing that you might have noticed that we have a callback URL query parameter, which is referring to the home route, because we are on the home route before we entered the sign-in page. It will be used to redirect the user to the previous visited page after the user is signed in. But there is a problem with just calling the sign-in method. You might have noticed that the page was refreshed, but we don't want any page refresh. Let's just go to the index.js file. Instead of calling the sign-in method, I'm gonna create another function, const handle sign-in. Instead of calling the sign-in method, I'm gonna use the push method to redirect the user to the sign-in page. So I'm gonna call the push method. And the route will be /auth/sign-in, not sign-in, sign-in. And I'm gonna pass the handle sign-in method. So let's go to the home page again, and let's click on sign in. And you can see we are now at the sign in page without any page refresh, but we don't have the callback URL as query parameter. So we need to manually pass a callback URL. The useRouter hook has a property called asPath. The asPath is just the current route. For example, if you are on home page, it will be just /. If you are on sign in page, it will be just /auth/sign-in. So we can pass this asPath as a callback URL in the query parameter. So I'm going to use template string. And let's pass a callback URL. And it will be the asPath. And now let's click sign in. And we have a callback URL as parameter, which is equals to /. That means previously it was the home page that we have visited. So let's go to the sign in file. Now to style the page, we need to import a lot of components. So I'm gonna paste the code. Alright, so we need these components. So we have imported the useState hook, useRouter hook again, and we have imported some Chakra UI components, box, just a container, then the button component, grid component, then a heading component, a vertical stack component for stacking components on top of another. Then we have some form components and an input component and a Chakra factory function. Then we have imported the session hook, then the sign in sign out function, and then some icon from React icons. Okay, so first of all, we want to prevent the signed in user to visit this page. So we need to use the use session hook. So use session. And let's get the session. It also gives us a status property. We have an error. It's a React hook error. Okay, so the sign in function name has to be uppercase S. Also here. So if the status is loading, we want to display a message. So if status is equals to loading, we're gonna return heading and the text will be checking authentication. But if the session is present, we're gonna redirect the user to the home page. So if session is present, then we're gonna return a component. The message will be you are already signed in. And after 5 seconds, we're gonna redirect the user to the home page. So timeout will be 5000, and we're gonna run the push method, and the URL will be /. So let's get the push method. So const push from use router. So now let's add a box component instead of this div. So box, and I'm gonna add a vstack component, vertical stack. Vertical stack is just a flex container, and here I'm gonna loop over an array of objects. And now I'm gonna create a providers array. Actually, it will be an array of object which will contain some information about the provider. So const providers, it will be an array of objects. I'm gonna paste them here. So these are the array of objects. It has a name property which will be the provider name, and the icon property which will be the icon that we have imported. So let's loop over the providers array. Providers dot map. The first item will be the provider, which will be an object. I'm gonna destructure it, so it will have a name and icon. So let's return a component. I'm gonna return the button component, and it will have a text sign in with the provider name. Let's pass some props. First, we need to pass the key. It will be just the name. Then I want a left icon in the button. So left icon will be the current icon. And you can see we have 3 beautiful buttons. So let's add the on-click handler. And I will pass a function called handle auth sign in. And I'm gonna call it here and pass the provider name. And before I implement the handle auth sign in function, let's add some property. So text transform will be uppercase, and width will be 100%. So let's implement the handle auth sign in function. So const handle auth sign in. It will be a function which will return another function. The first function will take a parameter which is the provider name, and the outer function will just call the sign in method. Now by default, the sign in function will redirect you to the sign in page, but you can pass the provider name directly inside the sign in function call. If you do that, you will not be redirected to any other route. You will be directly logged in with that provider. For example, if you just pass GitHub, then you will be sign in with GitHub. You will not be redirected to any other page. So here in this case, we will just the provider. So let's see if it works or not. So now if I click on this button, we will be signed in with our GitHub account. So let's click it. So authorize that on John. And it says checking authentication, you are already signed in. And we should be redirected to the home page. Okay, so we are now at the home page, signed in as thatonjohn@gmail.com. So our buttons are really working. If I try to visit the /auth/signin page, we should not have access to the buttons. Okay, so you are already signed in. We don't have access to the sign in buttons. So our sign in page is almost ready. Now let's add the input form for email. So outside the vstack component, I'm gonna create a form element. Now we have imported a function called chakra. It is a factory function. Basically with this you can create any HTML element, a chakra UI component. Here we want to make a HTML form element to a chakra UI form component. So it is pretty simple. Just use the form. I don't need action. But instead of just form, we're gonna use chakra.form. And now it is a chakra UI component. And inside this form component, we're gonna add a form label. And the label will be email address. And I'm gonna add an input. Type will be email. And to store the email value, we need a state. So let's create a state. Use state. State name will be email. And the value will be empty string. So on change, we're gonna set the email state. So e and set email. It will be e.target.value. Then we need a button component. And the button text will be login. Type will be submit. Width will be 100%. And margin on top and bottom will be 5. Now let's create a handle submit function. So const handle submit. And let's get the event. And we want to prevent the page refresh. So prevent default. And if email is just an empty string, we're gonna return false. And let's call the sign-in method. And we need to pass the provider name, which is email. And we need to pass an object. And we need to pass the email value. So just pass email. Now for email login, you can prevent the page refresh, but for other providers, you cannot. So I'm gonna pass another property, which is again redirect, which will be false. And on the form, let's add the on submit prop, and it will be handle submit. Okay, so that's it for our sign in page. Now let's handle the Twitter and Google login functionality. Then we will learn how to set up the email login functionality. So first of all, just go to developer.twitter.com. Then you need to request a developer account. If you are approved, then just go to the dashboard, create a new project, then just go to the project. And on the bottom, here is an option, add app. And make sure it is development. And then go to next. And give your app name. I will call it Next.auth YT. Then next. And here it will give you this API key and API secret key. We need to store them. But before that, we need to go to this link, enable third-party authentication. And let's go to the bottom. It says authentication not set up. So let's click on setup. So click on OAuth 1 and make sure you have checked this request email from users and add permission to read. And give the callback URL, which will be same localhost 3000 /API/auth/callback, then the provider name, which is Twitter, and give your website URL. I'm gonna give mine. Then a terms of service URL. I'm just gonna paste a dummy URL, and let's click on save. And now we need to store these API keys in our environment variables. So let's open up the .env file, and I need to create 2 more variables. I'm just gonna paste the variable names. So I will copy this API key and I'll paste it here, and now the API secret key. Now let's open up the Next.Auth file, and let's import the Twitter provider. And let's add the provider, Twitter provider, and I'll just copy paste the property and values from here. We have used the same environment variables. So now let's see if it works or not. Let's click on sign in. And before I click on the button, I have forgot to restart my dev server. So I'll kill the server and npm run dev. And now let's refresh the page. And now let's click on sign in with Twitter. Okay, so it has redirected us to this page. Now let's click on authorize app, redirecting you back to application. And you can see we are now signed in, and we have been redirected to the home page. So our Twitter sign-in functionality is working. So now let's set up Google provider. So just go to next.js.org/provider/Google. You will see this page, and you will have this tool link. So just click on this one, the configuration link. I will open this up on new tab. And you'll see this page. You might need to create a new project if you don't have any. I already have one project. After creating the project, click on this create credentials and click on OAuth client ID. And our application type will be web application, and give your app a name. I'm gonna call it Next-Auth YT. And then add a URI for authorized redirect URLs. And again, the callback URL will be http://localhost 3000 /API/auth/callback, then the provider name, which is Google. And now let's create, oops, not 300, 3000. Now let's create. And we have this client ID and client secret, so we need to store them. I will just copy this environment variable names, and let's go to env.local, and I'll paste it here. I only need the environment variable names. So the client ID is this one, and client secret is this. And now let's go to Next-Auth. Again, I will copy this import statement, and I'll paste it here, and also this one. Alright, so our provider is set up. Now let's restart the server. So now let's click on sign in. And let's click on sign in with Google. And choose your Google account. I'm gonna choose this one. And again, you are already signed in. And we have been redirected to the home page, signed in as daronjon@gmail.com. So we have successfully set up the Google authentication. Now every time you sign in with a provider, all of the session data is stored inside your browser. So that's not really that useful. You need to store your user data in some kind of database. So now let's set up a database where we will store all of our user data. I'm going to use MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database. You can use whatever you want. Let's go to the Next-Auth. And if you go to the bottom, you will find a section adapters. And here you will see all of the database that Next.js supports by default. We have DynamoDB, Firebase, MongoDB. So we're going to use MongoDB. We're going to use MongoDB Atlas as our host. So let's set up MongoDB Atlas. So just go to cloud.mongodb.com. Then you will be redirected to this page where you need to log in with your account. Create an account if you don't have any, but I'm going to use Google to log in. So after you have logged in with your account, you might need to create a new organization if you don't have any. I already have one. I'm going to choose this one. Let's create a new project. I will call it Next.auth YT. And I don't need any other members, so let's create project. So build a database. I will go for free. Let's create. Choose your cloud provider and the region. I'm going to choose the default one. And if you want to change the cluster name, you can do that. I'm not gonna bother about it. So let's create cluster. And we need to create a database user. So I'm gonna give my name and also a super secure password. Let's create user. And on the bottom, you have to add an IP address. I'm gonna add my current IP address. And let's finish and close. And let's go to database. MongoDB is creating our cluster, but let's go to the network access and click on edit. Now my current IP address doesn't work, so I need to use allow access from anywhere. So let's click confirm. And again, let's go to database. And it will take some minute. I'll be right back when it is done. Alright, so our database is now ready. Let's click on this connect button and choose the method. We need to choose the second one. And make sure the driver is Node.js and the version is the latest one. And this is our connection string. And let's go to the MongoDB provider doc. We need to install these packages. So I'm gonna copy the command and I will kill the server. So let's install the packages. Alright, so our packages are now installed. Let's go to the .env file. And we need another environment variable. I'm gonna copy the variable name, which is MongoDB URI. And the value will be the connection string. I'll copy this. Now, instead of this password, we need to give the database password, not your MongoDB account password, your database password. And we need to give a database name. So let's create a database. I will close this model. Let's go to browse collections and click add my own data. And let's create a database. I'll call it auth and the collection name test. Doesn't matter here. So let's create. So we have an auth database, and I will remove this placeholder, and database name will be auth. And now we need to create some files. I'll create a directory inside the source directory. I will call it database, and I'll create a file. I will call it connectdb.js, and I'll copy the whole code from here and I'll paste it here. Basically, it is just getting the environment variable. If the environment variable doesn't exist, we are throwing an error, and then we are just returning a client promise. You don't have to bother about them, they are already configured. And now let's go to Next-Auth, and we need to import that. So import client promise from .. We have to go one step back again, then database, then connectdb, and we need to import the MongoDB adapter. I will just copy this thing, now paste it here. Then we need to add another property, which is adapter, and the adapter will be MongoDB adapter, and just pass the client promise. And now let's just restart the server with npm run dev. And let's just refresh the page. And now let's click on sign in again, and sign in with Google. I will choose this one. Again, we are signed in, but now let's go to the database and let's just refresh. And you can see we have bunch of collection. We have an accounts collection. We have all of the information, the ID token, user ID, then expires at, then sessions, then the users. We have the name, email, then the image. Okay, so now let's sign out. And in the database, let's just refresh. And let's go to sessions. You can see we don't have any session because we have logged out. So our MongoDB adapter is working fine, and it has redirected us to the /sum route. So finally, now let's implement the email authentication system. So let me show you the documentation about email provider. Now when you submit an email address on the client side, Next.Auth will send an email to that email address. That email will actually contain a magic link, and you can sign in with that magic link. No password is involved here. So to send an email, first of all, we need to install a package called NodeMailer. I will kill the server here. So let's install the package npm I NodeMailer. So let's install it. Alright, so NodeMailer is now installed. Now to send an email, we need to use an email service. I'm going to use SendGrid. So if you want to follow along with me, just go to sendgrid.com and then create a new account if you don't have any, and then just sign in with your account. Now after you have logged in with your account, you might need to create a sender account if you don't have any. So just create a sender account with the necessary information. After that, just go to email API, then go to integration guide. Now choose SMTP relay. Now it will ask you to give an API key name. So I'm just gonna give test. So let's create key. And SendGrid has given us this API key, and we need to store this information in our environment variable. So click on I have updated my settings, and let's store them in our environment variables. So in the documentation, where is that? here. So we need all of these environment variables. So I'll copy them and I'll paste them in .env file. I will remove these values. Email server user will be the username, which is API key. Then the email server password, which is this key. The email server host will be this smtp.sendgrid.net. And then email server port will be 587 because we are on development. Then email from will be the sender account. In my case, it will be daronjon@gmail.com. Alright, so let's go to Next.js and let's import the email provider. Actually, I will copy code from here. And let's add the email provider. So I will copy all of this code from here. And we don't need to change the environment variables because we have used the same environment variables from here. So after the Google provider, I will paste the code. Alright, so we are all set. Now let's run the server. npm run dev. So let's refresh the page. Alright, so now let's click on sign in. I will put my email address. And let's click on login. And on the console, we don't have any error. So now let's go to Gmail. And most probably your email will go on spam. So go to spam. And you can see we have an email from localhost 3000. And here we have this magic link. So let's click on it. And it has opened up a new tab. And you can see checking authentication. You are already signed in. And you can see signed in as daronjon@gmail.com. So the email authentication is working fine. So we have successfully implemented the authentication system with GitHub, Twitter, Google, and email. So finally, now let's see how we can protect our Next.js API route and a page. So first we're going to create a protected route. So inside the API directory, I will create a file called protected.js. And I'll close these files for now. So first we need to import a function called getSession from Next.auth React. From Next.auth/React. And now let's create a handler function. And let's export that. So the handler function takes two parameters. One is request, another one is response. So we need to get the session using the getSession method. So const session. It will be asynchronous, so I'm going to make it async. And let's await the process. And let's call the getSession. And we need to pass an object. And inside the object, we need to pass the request. If the session exists, we're going to return a response. So if session exists, we're going to return res.send. We're going to just send the session. Else we're gonna send a response. So return res.send not authenticated. You can see that I am currently authenticated with this email. And if I just go to localhost 3000 /API/protected, I should get the session. Alright, so we have this object session, user name Anjan, then email thatanjan@gmail.com. And now let's sign out. And here let's refresh the page. And you can see not authenticated. So now our API is protected, and that's how you can protect an API using the getSession method. So now let's see how we can protect a page. So I'm going to close this file. I'm going to create a new file inside the pages directory. I will call it protected.js. And here let's create a component. Now there are two ways you can protect a page. You can protect the page using server-side rendering or client-side rendering. So we're gonna see both. So first let's see how we can protect a page using server-side rendering. Again, we have to import the getSession function. So import getSession, and we will also need the useSession function from Next.Auth React. So now let's export a function called getServerSideProps. Now this function takes a parameter called context. I will call it CTX. And obviously it will be an asynchronous function. Now we need to call the getSession function and just pass the context object, and it will return us the session object. So const session await, and now we just need to return the session as a prop. So this will get the session and pass it as a props, and now we need to call the useSession hook. Now when we first use the useSession hook, it sends a request on the client side. It will not call any API request because the session already exists in our component. So let's get the session. And it will also give us the status. So this will contain the session, and status can be either loading, authenticated, or unauthenticated. And just because we already have the session, that's why status will never be loading. It will be either authenticated or unauthenticated. If the status is unauthenticated, we want to display a message that this is a protected page, you are unauthenticated. So if status is equals unauthenticated, we're going to return a heading component. So I will import that. Oops, it will be named import from Chakra UI React, and I will return a heading component, and the text will be you are unauthenticated, this is a protected page. Else we want to render the user email. So again, heading, and it will be session.user.email. So let's see if it works or not. So let's go to localhost 3000/protected. And you can see you are unauthenticated, this is a protected page. So let's go to the login page. So it will be /auth/signin. So let's just log in with Google. I will choose this email. And you can say you are already signed in. And if I go to the protected page, you can see it has printed out the email. And if I refresh the page, it's still showing me the user email. So our page is now protected, but you might want to redirect your user to the sign-in page from the server side. You don't even want to show them the protected page. So let's see how we can do that. So we just need to check if session exists or not. If session doesn't exist, we want to return an object. And that object will have a redirect property. It will be an object too. We just need to pass destination. And destination will be our route where you want your user to redirect. So it will be /auth/signin. So let's see if it works or not. So let's go to the home page and I will sign out. Alright, so I'm not signed in. And you can see you are unauthenticated. This is a protected page. So I will refresh the page. I should not see the protected page. I should be redirected to the sign-in page. And you can see I am now at the sign-in page. So that is totally optional. That's up to you. But I just wanted to let you know that you can do this. So this is how you can protect a page from server side. Now let's see how we can do that on client side. Actually, we have seen how to do that on client side. If you don't pass the get server side props, it will work on client side. So I will just comment the get server side props function. And let's go to the protected page. It should give me an error, because we are not handling the status of loading. Alright, so you can see we have an error because we are not handling the loading status. So we can handle the status of loading. So I'll just copy this code. And instead of P, I will use heading. And if I refresh the page, you can see that it's loading and now you are unauthenticated. This is a protected page. So this is how you really protect a page from client side using the use session hook. But you can do more than this using the use session hook. You might tell the use session hook that this is a protected page on the hook call by passing an object. And you can pass a property called required to true. If you pass required to true, that means that this is a protected page. Authentication is needed. If the user is not authenticated, then the use session hook will redirect you to the sign-in page. So let's see if it works or not. And you can see that it is redirecting me to the sign-in page. Alright, so now I'm in the sign-in page. But you might not want your user to redirect to the sign-in page. You want to do something else. And also you might have noticed that it had a page refresh. So you might also want to prevent that. To stop the default behavior, you can pass a function called onUnauthenticated. This will be a function. If you pass the onUnauthenticated function, then the default behavior will be stopped. And I will go to the protected page. And you can see it is showing me loading. It will not show anything because status will be always loading. So in onAuthenticated function, you can do whatever you want. You might want to redirect your user to any other page or anything. So I'm gonna redirect my user to the sign-in page using the useRouters push method so that it will not have any kind of page refresh. So I'm gonna import that. Oops. So let's get the push method. And let's call the push method. And I'm just gonna copy the URL. So I will refresh this page. And you can see it is saying loading. And now it has redirected me to the sign in page without any page refresh. So this is how you can protect a page using the use session hook from client side. So that's it. That's all there is that I wanted to show you in this video. You can see that authentication with Next.Auth is super simple. We have write tiny amount of code for authentication logic. If you want to do that from scratch, you had to write tons of code. If you don't believe me, you can try it if you want. So that's it. If the video has been helpful for you, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. If you have any question, please comment down below. If you want to suggest me any kind of topic, please do let me know in the comment section. If you want to get daily tips and tricks, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram as thatonjohn, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.